My life up until that Tuesday night was defined by the scent of success, the warm, comforting, unmistakable aroma of cinnamon, brown sugar, and proofing yeast. That smell, thick in the air of our town, was the essence of the Daily Crumb, the bakery my parents, Vivian and Robert Thorne, built from the ground up. I was their only child, their pride, their final, perfect product. I was an only child because, as I was often reminded, they had to devote every resource to the business. I never lacked for anything, and in return I provided them with a faultless success story, good grades, a steady job, and a quiet, grateful existence. I was living proof that their hard work, their sacrifice, had been worth it. The clock on my phone read 10:45 p.m. when the screen lit up with Mum's contact photo. I was winding down, folding laundry, settling into the familiar, predictable rhythm of my week. My mother simply does not call after 9 p.m. It's a rule as fundamental as the rising of the sun. The late call was a cosmic disturbance. I felt that familiar, primal clench in my gut, the one that tells you a structural failure is imminent. I assumed the worst. The hospital, an accident, a sudden illness that respects no schedule. I answered instantly, my voice tight. "Mum, what is it? Is everything okay?" She didn't immediately launch into the crisis. Instead, there was a strange, unsettling quiet on the line. "Alex, please tell me you're truly alone right now. My roommate was out of town, and the apartment was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator." I moved instinctively, walking away from the bright kitchen to curl up on the living room sofa, pulling my oldest, softest blanket around me. I felt 30 years old suddenly evaporate, replaced by the small, anxious boy waiting to hear the bad news. "I'm alone, Mom. Just tell me." She took a breath that sounded too deep, too ragged for my usually composed, hyper-efficient mother. "Good. You need to know something before Grandma Clara's will is read next week, and I need you to just listen until I'm finished." Grandma Clara's will. My beloved grandmother had passed away 3 weeks prior. The shock wasn't about the will itself, but the timing. Why now? Then she started talking about Ilara. For context, Ilara was the ghost in our family history. My mother's sister. I had never met her. The official story was simple. She was too volatile and uncommitted for business, my parents would say with a shared, dismissive sigh. She chose a nomadic life over commitment. She was the cautionary tale used to justify their own ruthless ambition. She was the one smudge on the otherwise perfect Thorne family portrait. Ilara didn't leave, because she was unstable, my mother finally whispered, her voice barely a thread. "We, your father and I, we forced her out 25 years ago. It was about the initial property, the one Grandma Clara left us. It was a partnership, Alex, the beginning of the Daily Crumb. But we saw a chance to expand. We saw this." She paused, gesturing vaguely, I assumed, at the comfortable, moneyed life they now inhabited. Ilara wanted a quiet coffee shop, a small thing. She wouldn't sign over her half of the property to secure the second, larger bank loan. My breath hitched, waiting for the rest of the sentence. "Your father," she choked out. He forged her signature on the mortgage documents, and we changed the locks on the original property. We cut her out entirely, legally and emotionally." The silence that followed was immense. It wasn't the sound of a family secret, it was the deafening implosion of my entire reality. The Daily Crumb. The place built on honesty and hard work. The legacy that funded my education, my life, my sense of self-worth. It was all founded on an act of criminal theft against my own aunt. The beautiful, warm, comforting scent of cinnamon and yeast suddenly curdled in my memory, becoming the sickening aroma of a massive, long-fermented lie. I managed only one word, a sound scraping out of my throat. "Why?" My mother's voice hardened slightly, slipping back into her CEO persona as she scrambled for justification. "For you, Alex, for this family's security. We had to choose. We chose prosperity. We chose to protect your future." I hung up the phone without another word. The screen went dark, but my life had never been brighter, illuminated by the harsh, ugly light of a crime committed in my name. The anxiety of expecting an emergency was replaced by the cold, devastating certainty that the emergency had been the foundation of my life all along, The first night was a blur of cold panic. I didn't sleep. I just paced my small apartment, the silence amplifying the echo of my mother's confession. He forged her signature. We cut her out entirely. The scent of their betrayal, the imaginary stench replacing the comforting bakery aroma, seemed to cling to the walls. I kept running my mind over the timeline. They committed the fraud 25 years ago, right around the time I was born. My existence wasn't an addition to their life. It was the justification for their crime. I knew I couldn't face my mother immediately. I needed data. I needed the full, unvarnished story from the other partner in the crime. My father, Robert Thorne. He was the logical one, the numbers man, the CFO of our little family enterprise. If my mother dealt in emotional lies, my father dealt in financial omissions. I drove to his office the next afternoon. It wasn't at the Daily Crumb headquarters, but in a quiet, anonymous building he used for strategic planning. The room smelled of polished mahogany, stale coffee, and a distinct lack of yeast, a sterile environment for sterile choices. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked prepared, like a lawyer waiting for a difficult deposition. He didn't offer comfort or an apology, he offered a defense. "Sit down, Alex, I know Vivian spoke to you. She was emotional." "I can give you the context," he said, tapping a pen on his desk, the cold, rhythmic sound marking time over a broken life. He launched into his rationalization, never once using the word sorry. "We didn't steal, Alex. We acted decisively. Your Aunt Ilara was going to let that property, which was the key to our entire vision, sit dormant. She wanted a boutique, a hobby. We saw a scalable, profitable business that could secure your future and employ 100 people. It was a choice between stagnation and prosperity. I chose prosperity. I chose you." He handed me a stiff, yellowing manila envelope. It contained the original faded partnership agreement between Vivian and Ilara. It was painful to look at. 2 names, bound by blood, planning a venture. I saw Ilara's handwriting in the margins, whimsical suggestions for a local library corner, notes on ethical sourcing, and small doodles of coffee cups. My mother's notes, scribbled in harsh red ink, were all cold calculations, projected margin, expansion timeline, capital needs. "See?" my father said, pointing to Ilara's margin notes. "Naive, uncommitted. I secured the asset." I nodded slowly, pretending to digest his argument about necessary aggression, but my hands were shaking as I handled the documents. I noticed a small bundle of brittle folded airmail letters tucked deep inside the envelope. Clearly having fallen out of the agreement pages long ago, these letters were the real evidence. They were from Ilara to Vivian, written in the weeks and months after the supposed huge falling out. They weren't angry letters demanding legal justice. They were desperately confused, heartbroken pleas for human connection. "Why won't you answer my calls? Why did you change the locks? Did I do something wrong?" The truth of the betrayal wasn't the forged signature, which was a legal act. The truth was the emotional ghosting, the systematic erasure of a sister who had done nothing but ask for fairness. My parents hadn't fought Ilara. They had simply severed her from the family body and then spent 25 years pretending the wound didn't exist. My father's entire unstable narrative, the one I'd swallowed my whole life, wasn't a flaw in my aunt's character. It was the soundproofing my parents used to quiet their guilt. I was their loyal son, and I had been the willing audience for their cruel, calculated performance. I put the documents back into the envelope, feeling the paper stick to my slightly sweaty fingers. I knew then that my parents' ambition was far more dangerous than I ever understood. It wasn't just about money. It was about the cold, deliberate mean-spiritedness required to destroy a sister and then lie about her existence to their own son for decades. My mission was no longer just about knowing the truth. It was about finding the woman who held the genuine, unvarnished history of my family. The desire to see her, to see Ilara, became an overwhelming physical need. I couldn't breathe the air of my parents' success anymore. Every cake display at the Daily Crumb looked like a monument to their deceit. I needed to see the woman they had spent a quarter-century painting as volatile and uncommitted before the court reading of Grandma Clara's will, which felt like the final deadline on my family's honesty. I told my parents I had a mandatory work conference for the weekend, a lie they accepted easily, proud of my supposed ambition. I drove 500 miles, leaving the frantic pace of the city behind, until I hit a small, damp, quiet coastal town. I found her operating a place called the Open Page. It was the antithesis of the Thorn brand. Small, deliberately local, and clearly surviving on passion, not corporate leverage. The air inside smelled intoxicatingly of dark roasted coffee and old paper, a complex, honest scent that shamed the manufactured sugar rush of my parents' empire. I hesitated in the doorway, feeling clumsy and out of place in my expensive city-tailored coat. When I walked toward the counter, a woman looked up. She was mid-50s, with deep, kind lines around her eyes and hair pulled back in a practical braid. She was not the polished, perfectly coiffed image of my mother, Vivian, but in her eyes I saw the familiar Thorn intensity, softened by something resilient. She recognized me instantly. My father, Robert, had always joked about our Thorn jawline. "You're Vivian's boy," she stated, her voice soft but firm, offering no immediate warmth. I felt 30 years of guilt and silence pressed down on my chest. I stumbled through my practiced confession. I knew the truth about the property, the forgery, the financial aggression. I told her I hadn't come for money or a resolution. I had come for the honest history. She didn't look triumphant or seek revenge. She looked at me with immense heartbreaking fatigue. She made me a perfect black cappuccino, taking an unhurried, almost ritualistic time over the pour. "I didn't want their money, Alex," she finally said, watching the steam curl. "I wanted my sister back. And I wanted the quiet place Grandma left us. They saw a property value. I saw a sanctuary. The forgery was the business truth. The human truth is they had to kill the sister who reminded them of the life they gave up for ambition." She explained that she signed the painful non-disclosure agreement, the final act of her erasure, only because my grandfather was ill, and she didn't want the legal battle to destroy his final quiet months. My parents had weaponized family loyalty against her integrity. I realized they hadn't just stolen a building. They had stolen her right to mourn the end of her family with dignity. The family narrative that she was unstable was just the convenient fiction that allowed them to sleep at night. I stayed in the coastal town for 4 days, renting a small room above a dry cleaner's. I wasn't just talking to Lara, as she preferred to be called. I was observing a life built on values my parents had discarded. She ran her shop with a calm, genuine care. She knew her regulars' names and histories. It was a slow, intentional life that stood in stark contrast to the frantic, expansion-driven anxiety of my parents' world. One afternoon, Lara invited me into the cluttered, quiet space she used for bookkeeping. She pulled out a small wooden box, a simple, unvarnished box, and inside was a single worn bank receipt, saved with the reverence of a priceless artifact. It was the receipt for the amount my father, Robert, had paid her 25 years ago. I saw the number and then I saw the context. "Your father never paid me for my equity, Alex," she explained, her voice entirely factual, devoid of self-pity. "He paid me back only the existing debt on the property. He convinced me it was a generous severance for my half of the loan I co-signed with your mother. He kept my 50% ownership stake for free, and with a clear title, immediately secured the second, much larger loan that launched the Daily Crumb chain." The revelation was like a punch to the gut, far more painful than the initial confession of forgery. The forgery was a legal tool. This was petty, calculated cruelty. They had actively ensured their own sister was left with nothing but debt relief, while pocketing her full equity share to fuel their rapid expansion. I sat there staring at the receipt. My parents had always presented my comfortable, privileged life, my education, my apartment, my secure future, as the just reward for their hard work. Now I realized my entire existence, everything I had, was paid for with the stolen equity of this receipt. "They didn't just pay for your college with bakery profits, Alex," Lara stated, her eyes locking onto mine. "They paid for your college with my inheritance. They needed you to be successful, perfectly comfortable and blissfully ignorant. Your success was the final proof that their crime was justified. They made you the ultimate beneficiary of their theft." The shame was overwhelming. My meticulous, predictable life wasn't an independent achievement. It was the final, elegant capstone on their 30-year-old crime. I wasn't just a beneficiary of the lie. I was the unintentional proof that the lie was worth it. I knew then that my struggle wasn't against them, but against the polluted foundations of my own identity. I couldn't stay on the coast with Lara forever, but I couldn't go back to their house either. The drive back to the city was filled with a cold, relentless certainty. I had to strip myself of everything they had bought for me. The truth I carried now was too heavy to coexist with their comfortable lie. I chose the kitchen for the confrontation. Not the high-rise office, not the quiet living room, but the sterile, pristine white marble counter, the absolute ultimate symbol of their success and status. They were casually finishing a quiet, late dinner, looking the picture of well-earned, middle-aged contentment. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I was purely analytical, speaking with the coldness of a forensic accountant. I placed the 3 pieces of evidence: the partnership agreement, the letters of exile detailing the ghosting, and the debt-only receipt, on the flawless marble. "I found Lara," I stated, my voice low and steady. "I know the truth. You didn't just pressure her. You executed a meticulously planned financial theft. You forged a signature, then you paid her back only the debt, keeping her full equity stake to secure the second loan that launched the chain. The story of her being unstable was just the curtain you pulled over your own cruelty for 25 years. My mother Vivian reacted first, her composure shattering like glass, her face contorted with outrage and, more importantly, fear. Fear of exposure. "How dare you? You have no idea the risks we took, the struggles we overcame. This bakery, this life, is the result of sacrifice. You are a beneficiary of everything we created. Don't you dare sit there and judge me from the comfort we bought you." My father, Robert, ever the pragmatic enforcer, attempted to reclaim the narrative, hands pressed flat on the marble, physically shielding the documents. "This is history, Alex. A 25-year-old settlement. It was a necessary business aggression. You wouldn't have the opportunities you have now if we hadn't been tough. You are destroying this family over an ethical footnote." "It's not a footnote, Dad. It's the whole book," I shot back, looking directly into his eyes. "I am the collateral damage of your footnote. You told me I was protecting my inheritance. I was protecting your crime. I am resigning from the small position I hold at your distribution center, and I am moving out of the apartment you lease for me immediately. I want nothing that the bakery paid for." Vivian's cries intensified. But they weren't tears of remorse, they were tears of profound, self-pitying rage at the consequence of her choices. "You're choosing her, the woman who chose to fail. You're throwing away everything we built for you." "No," I corrected her, picking up the receipt. "I'm choosing integrity. You destroyed yourselves 25 years ago. I'm just walking away from the mess." I left the documents on the counter and walked out, not looking back at the 2 figures frozen in their moment of agonizing, exposed guilt. The consequence of walking out was immediate and absolute. Within 48 hours, my apartment lease was terminated, the car insurance was cancelled, and my mother sent a chillingly brief text: "We need time, don't contact us." They couldn't control me, so they decided to erase me entirely. The silence was less painful than the lie, but it was still a vast, cold void. My true saving grace was Liam. I had only told him the story in pieces, worried the sheer scale of the betrayal would overwhelm him, but he took it all in stride. Liam works in social services. He understands complex trauma and broken systems. He was my unwavering emotional firewall. He helped me find a tiny, much older flat above a dry cleaner's, the antithesis of my parents' polished luxury. The air always smelled faintly of cleaning fluid, not cinnamon and yeast, and that felt like a necessary cleansing barrier. "Their money was their control," Liam reminded me one night as we sat surrounded by moving boxes, eating takeout pizza. "This tiny apartment, the job you found at the local library, this is yours. Every struggle, every victory here is clean. You're building your own provenance." He helped me paint the walls a calm, neutral grey. I took on a second side job, tutoring for extra cash, and plunged into studying for my master's degree in archiving. A quiet, focused world far removed from the aggressive finance of my parents. Stripped of my financial safety net, the sheer effort required to exist was exhausting, but strangely purifying. I felt the shame of being a beneficiary of the fraud begin to recede, replaced by a fierce pride in self-sufficiency. My parents were determined to punish me with silence, but the silence had become a necessary freedom. I was no longer the son they needed. I was simply Alex, earning his way, one honest paycheck at a time. The only family I had left was the one I built myself, and for the first time it felt structurally sound. The new reality I inhabited was small, busy, and blessedly free of lies. The silence from my parents was a permanent fixture, an icy landscape I no longer tried to cross. I was too busy working at the library and studying for my degree to mourn a relationship they had sacrificed for money. My relationship with Lara was the single, constant source of warmth, but it was earned, not given. It wasn't about catching up on lost years of birthdays. It was about building something new brick by brick. We never forced the family trauma. Instead, we focused on the tangible, the honest work. I started spending my weekends at the open page, not as a supplicant but as a worker learning a craft. Lara wasn't just the owner, she was a meticulous teacher. I helped her with inventory, learning the true cost of ethically sourced beans, and began assisting with her sourdough starter, an ancient, bubbling culture she kept alive with patient discipline. One Saturday, she was showing me how to fold the heavy, wet sourdough dough, a process requiring muscle and focus. "You can't rush this, Alex," she murmured, her hands dusted with flour. "It needs time, and it needs trust. If you try to force it, it breaks." I realized she wasn't just talking about bread. Her entire life, her quiet, intentional business, was the antithesis of the constant, frantic expansion model my parents chased at the Daily Crumb. The work was demanding, but there was a quiet reverence to it. She was teaching me the patience and integrity that my own parents had discarded for quick profit. My specific value to her grew in the quiet areas. I helped her streamline her archival system for the rare books she sold, and even started assisting with the social media, a small, carefully curated account that focused on the quality of her product and the local community, never on sales aggression. One morning I arrived to find a perfectly baked, crusty scone waiting for me, fresh from the oven, with a note taped to the parchment paper. It was written in her elegant, looping hand. "This business is built on good ingredients and honest effort. You finally have both, Alex. You're not fixing the past, you're just living a better future." That small note about a piece of bread meant more to me than any stock option or trust fund ever could. She wasn't judging me as Vivian's son, she was validating me as Alex, the trustworthy partner. It was the first genuine, unpolluted acknowledgement of my value I had ever received from a member of my family. I finally felt like I belonged to a healthy history, a history defined by the integrity of the present, not the betrayal of the past. 1 year had passed since the night I walked away from my parents' house and their poisoned prosperity. The distance wasn't measured in miles, but in the layers of integrity I had slowly managed to build back. I was finishing my master's degree in archiving, working a quiet, respected job at the local library, and my life with Liam was steady, built on shared values and honest rent payments. The anxiety that used to be a dull hum under my skin had finally receded. The will of Grandma Clara had been read months prior. She hadn't left me money. She had left me a collection of old, meticulously labeled family photos and a small box of her favorite cookie recipes. It was an inheritance of memory and love, entirely free of the financial complexity that had destroyed her daughters. My parents hadn't been happy, but they couldn't fight it. My relationship with Lara had blossomed into a genuine adult partnership. We had moved past the trauma, communicating mostly through the quiet, shared language of work. She relied on my organizational skills, and I relied on her patience and craft. One crisp morning, Lara called me into her small, cluttered office at the open page. It was a sun-drenched space filled with the comfortable weight of old books and the ever-present scent of dark roast. She didn't hand me a celebratory baked good. She handed me a small sheaf of legal documents and a new key, slightly heavier than the one I used to lock up. "Sit down, Alex," she said, her eyes serious. "This isn't a gift. This is a proposal." She explained that her previous partner, an older woman who started the shop with her, was retiring, and she needed someone who understood the core mission. "I need a partner who understands the vision, not the margin," she stated. "I need someone who will fight for quality over scale." someone who chooses a loyal customer over a bank loan. She slid the documents across the desk. I've drafted the papers with my lawyer. I'm putting you on the lease and giving you a full, legal 50% partnership stake in the open page. My throat tightened. This wasn't the millions in IPO stock my parents had promised. It was a small commercial property, an abundance of hard, honest work, and the profound responsibility of a shared vision. But it was also everything my parents had lied to steal, offered freely, based on trust, not blood or contract aggression. I looked down at the documents, seeing my name next to hers. This partnership was my true inheritance, not the wealth built on betrayal, but the chance to build a legacy on transparency and integrity. "This is built to last, Alex," Lara said, her eyes softening. "It's built on a foundation you helped clean. No lawyers, no NDAs, just trust." I accepted, feeling the weight of the key settle in my palm. It felt lighter, yet more solid, than anything I had ever held from the Thorne family. My parents remained in their gilded silence, still operating their chain, still sustained by the lie. They would likely never apologize or acknowledge the choice I made, but I was finally free of the constant, corrosive anxiety of their secret. I was no longer the keeper of my mother's shame or the beneficiary of my father's theft. I was the co-owner of a quiet, honest truth, and that I realized made me the wealthiest man in the family. I had finally defined myself by what I built, not what was stolen for me.